Juliet. And, I just want to thank Juliet and Lucy and Adele for this process. I think they talk a lot about research being me-search, but really research is we-search. But so my project had to do with trying to find ways that verbal language and dance intersect, how they can inform each other. And as Lucy has so beautifully set up for me, this idea that as human beings we are meaning makers, and we are drawn to patterns and to symbols that help us to organize the chaos of our existence into a meaningful experience. And as such, as Lucy has also demonstrated, there are many frameworks with which we use to decipher and communicate particular aspects of the human experience. And my brother, the physicist, would appreciate this slide here. So, math, obviously, numerical framework, or my husband, John, the musician, would appreciate musical framework, which kind of to me feels almost like an audible mathematics in a way. But for me, what has always got my wheels turning is dance, as you might have guessed, but also language. And I love words. I've always loved words. I'm a big word nerd. And life has just also always made more sense to me in motion. So I think language is something that we can all sort of understand in this way, right? Because language is a symbolic framework that allows us to name our experiences so that we can share them with others, sort of like how I'm doing that with you all right now. And dance is a little bit trickier to wrap our brains and words around, because dance is a bodily spatial framework of understanding. So let's see here. Dance. So when we ourselves are moving, dance literally connects our guts to ever-shifting patterns and experiences in space and shape and time and motion. And as a super complex somatosensory event, we're constantly renegotiating these relationships of our body with other bodies, to space, to props, all kinds of things. And I think this is true of all dance, but today I'm specifically speaking about modern concert dance, right? And so in that case, there's also this element of the viewer and the performer. And so as the viewer, even though you don't have that first-person kinesthetic perspective that I have in my body, you can still witness and respond to the spatial and temporal relationships that you're seeing played out up here by me, or if I had my colleagues up here dancing, right? So for instance, let's see, in dance, the spatial temporal location of an idea is really as important as the idea itself. It gives us much information about the idea itself. So if I wanted to dance about, let's say, two ideas. Let's say reach and look. Reach and look. So there are a number of ways that this could play out in real time. So I'm going to give you 4 examples how this could work. Okay, so dance about reach and look number 1. Okay, dance number 2. Dance number 3. Dance number 4. So, I would love to have time for all of you to come up here and show me your 4 ways to look at it. Because, there's any number of ways that we could communicate these 2 ideas depending on what nuanced aspect of reach or look or whatever we're trying to get at. Because in dance, it's important to consider the juxtaposition of ideas, the spaces between ideas, and also the spaces within ideas. Yeah? So in one way, it's similar to language in that just like a sentence, where something is tells you about what it is. But unlike dance, also the space within an idea can be quite multifaceted. We can have many meaningful relationships to the same event. And I think this is an important point because another sort of aspect of this multiplicity in regards to dance is that it's not necessarily important that the experience of meaning that I'm creating for myself as the dancer or the choreographer about look and reach, for instance, it's not so important that you are necessarily having the same relationship to that experience, that you're making the same kind of meaning. Many distinct and important, or that's not the right word, many distinct and meaningful experiences of one dance can exist at the same time, between two performers on stage, between a performer and an audience member, and amongst audience members. And so in this way, we can have quite a multiplicitous relationship to meaning. There's a lot of wiggle room within dance to create meaning. Yeah? And this particular point strikes me as markedly opposed to verbal language, right? Because verbal language ventures to stabilize meaning, so that all of us can take our individualized experiences of an idea and codify them toward one idea so that we can agree upon that idea and move forward. Yeah? So again, verbal language stabilizing meaning, and dance language multiplicity, spacious, plasticity of meaning. But I think it's important to note that this multiplicity of communication within dance is not something that creates divisiveness, right? It's rather that through this plastic and dynamic relationship to meaning, that we can carve out more nuance within ourselves for a richer experience, and that also we can carve out within ourselves empathy with which to engage with other people's experiences of meaning. And it is in this way that dance can forge powerful connection between us. So let's see, where am I at here? Aha! So you might be wondering who these four are. So before I get to them, I should say that, okay, so multiplicity, stability. But it strikes me also that as dancers, we are also verbal creatures. So we all learn language from a formative age, and we begin to assemble our world through the lens of language. And generally, most of us, most of the time, think in language. So then what becomes interesting for me is how do these two frameworks, these distinct frameworks of understanding, intersect? How does dance knowing collaborate with language knowing to inform the way that we construct intrapersonal meaning, so the way that we're constructing meaning for ourselves, as well as interpersonal meaning, the way that we're connecting and communicating that meaning to others. So, and furthermore, what are the benefits of this particular kind of codependent way of knowing? So to get at this question, let's see here, catch up with my cards. So to get at these questions, I sat out 4 American modern dance choreographers. And all 4 of these, so we have Rachel Lincoln, Liz Lerman, Phoebe Miller, and Terry O'Connor. All 4 of these choreographers also have an invested writing practice, because I was interested in how these two things were intersecting. And so I had an interview with each of these artists, and then I conducted a movement analysis of their dance works and a textual analysis of their writing works to see if I could locate the special sauce of what is happening, how they are using these two systems of understanding to frame their life experience and their art. So, okay, there we go. Okay, so in this process, 3 major observations came to the front. So among these 4 artists, there was quite a large range between artists that were interested in communicating unity of meaning and those that were interested in communicating multiplicity of meaning. And then it follows, and it kind of makes sense, that artists that were interested in communicating unity were interested in more literal, sort of concrete, compositional structures, and artists that were interested in multiplicity of meaning were drawn to more poetic form in both dance and writing. And I found this really interesting that all 4 of these artists, no matter if they were sort of pulled toward the more literal, stabilized meaning, or if they were pulled to the more poetic, multiplicitous meaning, all 4 of them excelled at achieving structural clarity in their dance work, as well as dynamic play in their writing. In other words, they're really good at writing dances and dancing writing. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to talk about 2 of these choreographers because they sort of represent the most different of the spectrum between unity and multiplicity. So the first of these is Liz Lerman. And amongst these 4 choreographers, Liz Lerman is most interested in this pull toward unity of meaning. So her work, it bolsters to, she aims to bolster our language-centric view of the world. So the compositional content and structure of her dances and writings ventures to clarify and further stabilize are codified verbal symbols. So to show you what I mean, I'm going to show you a short clip from a piece that she made in 1980 called Journey. This is actually a 1987 performance. Okay, Lucy, you can hit the lights. There we go. Uh-oh, missing sound.
The speaker probably went off.
Hey, Lucy, can you give me the lights for a sec?
The speaker probably went off because it was so long.
Sorry, there's one second.
I was
Un momento. Okay, let's try that again. Thanks, Liz. Here we go.
I came into the world. I became. I was begotten. I originated. I grew. I was born. I was entered into the birth register.
Thanks, Lucy. You can hit the lights. So, in this solo and in a lot of Liz's work that I've seen, she's quite literally tethering spoken words to gestures, almost with a kind of sign language-like accuracy, right? And so while it's still rich and expressive range and is pulling out nuances of meaning, in general, she's trying to close the gap between meaning and signification, right? She's trying to unite my experience, the experience of the performer with your experience of the viewer between language and dance. So, and Liz herself, she refers to this compositional style as subject matter dance. So she said to me, I am suspicious of the idea that dance can speak for itself. For me, the trouble starts as soon as some are dancing and some are audience. Most audiences need a place to park their planes. So Liz's gestures and her choreographic syntax resembles narrative storytelling. So she's giving the audience clues into the movement they are witnessing. And here in Journey and in a lot of her works, you'll see her use spoken text in this way. She'll use these repetitive, mimetic gestures, as well as objects from real life. She'll kind of ground you in real life experiences to create doorways toward cohesive understanding in her work. And to speak a little bit about her writing, just in general across mediums, Liz, she's a super captivating storyteller. And so the way her tone across her dance work and her written work and her speaking is very conversational, very energetic, kind of like you're at a dinner party with her and she's really jazzed about dance. So this is how she communicates. It was really fun to talk to her for this reason. She got me really excited about dance in general. So if Liz is interested in unity of meaning, Terry O'Connor is really excited about multiplicity of meaning. So for Terry, art making is an opportunity to infuse what he sees as a static, language-centric model with much more fluid meaning possibilities. And I would go further to say that Terry O'Connor, his real agenda is he is interested in addressing the ways that language functions to stabilize binary heteronormative identity in language. So Terry really wants to make room for queer identity within binary language structures. So that's kind of at the root of a lot of his work, even if it's not directly addressing that. So I'm going to show you a short clip of a piece that he made in 2006 called Baby. And there we go.
Away.
The sauce is centered with long. For loose of stole the floatlet. The sauce is centered with long. For loose of stole the floatlet. Long stole floatlet. Long stole floatlet. Long stole float. Blood. Blood. Was what was time, 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 was what was time.
Masturbate the witness. This prolapse.
So it's hard to give you a sense of the fullness of this evening-length work because it's a very circuitous work, as you might imagine. But you might have noticed even from this short clip from a piece called Baby, that there isn't much going on about baby. And so I think part of Terry's strategy here is he's sort of grounding us in this thematic idea, so that immediately through the juxtaposition of ideas and interruption of movement phrases and strange language, that he can already impart this cognitive dissonance surrounding this theme of baby. So he's setting you up, right? But you might notice also that there's still some kind of literal through line that you can follow in what he's doing. It has a literal through line because he's playing with these imagistic and syntactical threads that help us to navigate the cross-wired images and the dialogue and the movement sequences. So in this way, he's still providing us with a roadmap toward destabilized meaning, toward multiplicitous meaning. So Terry himself describes his choreographic strategy in this way. He says, He's trying to create movement systems that are poetically aligned with each other, so as not to create incongruities of understanding inside the systems themselves. So in regards to his play with meaning in his dance work, Terry said, the possibility of moving toward a singularity of meaning resides more in the purview of language. The fog of everythingness always alights on my dances. It comes to teach. It comes to remind me again and again that there is no denotative potential in a choreographic endeavor. And he goes on to say, this form does something to language that is quite inimitable. It disengages from the rules of language and simultaneously resituates them as reference. So like Liz, he's aiming to convey clarity, but through a much more poetic compositional structure, because his goal is not to lead us towards some cohesive narrative about baby or any particular story, but rather to provide a container within which we can be immersed in multiplicitous meaning possibilities. And I just want to briefly mention that while both of the clips that I showed you today from these two artists use spoken word in the choreography, Liz and Terry both have a lot of works that are much more driven by movement. So the use of spoken word here is not characteristic of their work or of any artist that is also interested in a writing practice. But speaking of writing, to speak of Terry's writing, while Liz's style, I mentioned, is very conversational and direct and kind of colloquial, Terry's is often highly poetic, though markedly more linear and direct than his choreographic works are. And he says that, he says, I try to pull my writing back to a balanced place, where it can be both poetic and have something to say at the same time. And he's a beautiful writer, a very articulate writer. So, as is Liz. So overall, Liz and Terry are after something different in the communication of their work. So, again, Liz, fascinating connection through unified meaning, and Terry kind of blasting open and creating room for more fluid meaning possibilities. I'm talking so far all about the interpersonal part of how they're communicating with others. But if we step back and think more about the creative process, the intrapersonal meaning-making part, making meaning for themselves in the process, both of these artists, and also Rachel Lincoln and B.B. Miller, the other choreographers consulted for the study, their choreographic process is not so different. So all four of these artists all of them spoke to the way in which the plasticity of dance meaning helps them to get to a generative place within dance and writing that is harder to get at within the construct of language knowing. And I think that also speaks back to a lot of what Lucy was talking about how they're sort of harnessed by these different parameters. So for Liz, if we think of the delivery of her choreography and her writing process as literal or vertical, her creative process is quite horizontal. She is utilizing dance as a way of thinking through an idea, also thinking over and under and behind an idea, a very spatial way of relating to inquiry. And she says, in describing her creative process, she says, making art is a way to understand things that are hard to understand otherwise. And for me, using the body helps to figure out what the hell the thing is. It's what I call harvesting intuition. For me, dancing is about comprehension. And Liz also expressed to me that her dual investment in language knowing and dance knowing helps her to be more porous in her ability to make connections between things or bend things to make more connections. So for her, this codependent way of knowing creates an in-between space for her to, in her thinking, that helps her create new patterns and new connections between the concrete and the abstract. So like Liz, Terry values this circuitous potential of dance thinking, and he stated to me in an interview that the dance that is made is a kind of result of the something I did, not a message I'm proposing. It's a document, an abstract document that doesn't depict anything, but it is the result of something very specific. So Liz values dance thinking as a preliminary tool to get at an idea that then can be fleshed out into a more literal and vertical structure, whereas Terry values the final choreography more as a living document of the meaning-making process that he underwent with his artists. So two very different ways of presenting a final art product, but both equally thought-provoking and eloquent because they're well orchestrated. So in closing, as I get toward the end here, I wanted to share this quote with you, which I think I got this quote from Hannah Wiley. Not sure. But I love this quote: "Art is not what you see, but what you make others see." And it strikes me that masterful art is that which helps us to forge new understandings for ourselves and share them with others. And so if a major goal is, as Degas says, to make others see, then if the creative act itself can't be experienced or communicated beyond the artist, then it's somewhat lost. So my research suggests that a codependent dance verbal way of knowing helps us to make our ideas more legible to others by dancing language and writing dances. That'll be the bumper sticker for my presentation today. And this codependent, or we could call this a transmodal practice, provides an in-between space inside of which we can challenge and clarify how we make meaning for ourselves, and then how we can effectively communicate that with others. So I woke up and I thought I wanted to do this, and I do it. So, okay, here we go, ready? This is the big finish. So, dance knowing, and language knowing, collaborating to make more spaces of meaning. Wasn't quite as cacophonous as I hoped.
You mentioned sign language briefly. Do you know of any choreographers who deal with that concept and expand on it?
Oh, I'm sure. I couldn't imagine that not being utilized. In fact, I know Brian utilizes sign language in his class. So, yeah, I think as artists, we're always calling on all of our faculties. And I feel like I've seen a piece where that was utilized. But that would be an interesting way into language and dance. So.
Actually, I remember 40 years ago, or 30 years ago, seeing a dance by Pat Graney before it was fashionable. Pat Graney is a local choreographer using sign language as the basis of even long work.
Curious, when you were going through your research, did you make the jump to gesticulation and how a lot of folks, use their body to sort of get at what they're saying, even sometimes prior to the words coming out? Was that something that you feel is like under the purview of this research, or in some ways separate because it's not as intentional?
That's interesting. One of the things that sparked my interest in doing this research was I was taking some courses in the English department, and they're interested in these ideas of translingualism and transmodalities. They're trying to find ways to help language structures be more applicable across mediums. So maybe within the same language, but from writing essays to an interview process. And I think they're particularly interested in students that are at American universities who are not English as first language speakers. And they were noticing that these students, when they were using their gesturing bodies, that they they were having a more embodied and deliberate experience of making meaning or communicating that then was easier to translate to another. And so then this is actually what got me going on this, because they're like, oh, we think that the way into like knowledge transfer is being embodied. And I was like, hello! And I was like, why don't you walk across the quad? And then I was like, well, that's what we do in dance all the time, you know? And so I was interested to see how these two things could interact and how it could move both ways. Like, how could we use dance to help writing, and how kind of like, you know, Lucy and I are kind of like, you know, on the same wavelength, obviously. So, did that really answer your question? Not really. It got me excited about my idea, but
yeah. I just, again, the intentionality. You kept saying that those practitioners are intentional about their writing practice and their choreography as things that they are intending to communicate with.
Yeah.
And I think maybe it's just my thinking of what is gesticulation. We sort of do it, but we don't really intend to do it, but we do it, and it makes the conversation.
Right, it's already more helpful for you communicating and for me understanding you. So dance is basically just a really good job of that, maybe. Yeah.
Early on in your presentation, you made this statement that dance tends to be more multi-dimensional in terms of meaning, and language more singular, or that they aim to do those things.
Yeah.
And I think I might have lost the next 5 minutes of your presentation because I was thinking so much about that. And one of my questions is, I wonder if you think that that's the result of practices that are inherent to the forms, or the result of the way that those forms have been used socially. Because I can think of really clear examples of dance that intends to be literal, even more so than, I mean, like I'm thinking of So You Think You Can Dance. There's that video flying around about the immigrants on the boat, and it's like, that is literal dance right there. And then there's, you know, poetry that is very much like what you showed in Terry Connor's work, that's printed in spacious arrangements on the page. You know, and Shakespeare went into a world of trying to sort of make multiplicitous language happen. So that's not really a question. I'm thinking.
No, but I know what you're getting at. I know what you're getting at, and I think that both dance meaning making and language meaning making can be all of these things, right? They can all be stabilizing and they can all be multiplicitous. But I think I agree with you that I think it's more about how we generally utilize these structures. And I think particularly with language, when you're looking at written language, that I think in some ways we become very constricted by the form itself. You know, that we have all these ideas, but we have to make them fit into the symbols of words, they have to fit onto the page. And I think poetry would be the closest to how much we can play with meaning. And I mean, again, a big word nerd, love all the words in poetry. And so I think it's possible in both, but I think it's, and I think what these artists who are practicing both of these particular forms are experiencing is that they can kind of get out of the headspace of they're kind of genred by the form that they're in all the time, and they can look across the cliff and remember that there's other ways to relate to either that experience or the one that they're in. And I think that's what they're doing really well, is they're sort of opening their frame so that they can utilize the full range from unification to multiplicitous within any form. Yeah. Did that help?
Hi. Have you investigated whether other choreographers that do not have an active writing practice actually have such range in their degree of literalness versus multiplicity of meaning?
I mean, I think that would be, this is something that sort of emerged out of looking at these artists, so it would be great now to pursue another project and just to notice this kind of frame in relation to any kind of artist. Because I think we are all ourselves in anything we do, so I don't think that you have to be a writer to be considering literal structure or poetic structure. So I think that would be, I didn't consider other artists, but I know that when I'm looking at people's work, I'm also considering how they're relating to me. And I think modern dance can sometimes be like quite, what is this? I'm gesturing, right? Tooth! Yeah. And which can work if there's structural clarity, but I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but I didn't look at those artists, but I think that would be interesting to see how other artists are relating to these different
I mean, that may speak to the question that was previous to mine, that maybe those artists that are only doing dance and have no connection to producing work in the written form,
Yeah.
they may have sort of more ambiguity in the way they present it, or the dance they make may be more have more multiple meanings to the audience.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think so. And I think in general, especially in modern dance land, we're kind of can get a little bit more over here. You know, maybe sometimes too much where, you know, people can't relate to what we're, unless, what is, speaking to what Liz was talking about, that the problem for her is when some people are dancing and some people are watching, that if we're all having an experience together, we are creating meaning together, you know, like in a dance class, and we are sharing that experience. But as soon as you're removed from the experience, it's a whole different equation of how to relate to that experience. And I think sometimes, in my experience, dance artists need to do a better job of creating bridges toward people to experience whatever it is that they want them to experience, whether it's multiplicitous meaning or if they're trying to get at a certain idea. But it can be really overwhelming to see something that there's no entry point into the work at all.
Thank you.
More than a stretch for Just saying.
Just showing off.
Yes. I don't think everyone's seen my pants.
I was noticing that. Where'd you get that?
They were a gift.
So, we'll move on to the grand finale.
I'll just go video.
Adele Nichol, Constellations of Freedom in Choreopolitics.
Okay. Hi everyone, thank you for being here. So for my summer research, and I'm going to just hide behind the podium so I have something to hang on to in case I fall over. So for my summer research, I studied dancers' experiences of freedom. And on one hand, freedom in dancing seems like the most obvious